I would like to welcome you to this media workshop on debt and development. And I'm welcoming you on behalf of my organization, SEATINI, AFRODAD, UDN, Uganda Debt Network, and also ACME. You are most welcome to this media workshop. The purpose of this meeting is to sharpen, or because your skills are already sharp, but to sharpen them further when it comes to reporting on the debt issue. Today, we are paying more than 50% in Uganda here of our GDP to debt repayment, and that's taking away resources from the very critical sectors, from the real economy, from education, from health, So it's an issue which we want to grapple with. But the issue is, how do we put it out there in the public domain, so that there is a generation of debate by the people, but also by the policymakers. They need to listen to you. They always read newspapers, they listen to radio. So we need to send out very, very key messages to the public, to the policymakers, to the technocrats.
So I think what really stands out very clearly here is that we are trying to see how best we can structure our reports on debt, such that they actually capture the attention of the ordinary citizen and thus rally them towards the campaign on prudent management of debt, but also to hold the technical people to account on how they are actually making decisions on our debt.
My presentation is on the genesis of the African debt crisis. We want to look at the genesis. Where did this crisis come from? If the issue is just corruption, would we have had this crisis or not? I want us to look at that graph. It shows the external debt stocks in the sub-Saharan Africa. So those lines going up, that's our debt stocks as sub-Saharan Africa. So when you look at that period from the 1970s, 74, the first lines there, we started getting into debt there. Those years, the 1970s, were those days when there was oil price shocks. The Arab countries formed a cartel, the OPEC, those countries which were dealing in oil. And because of that cartel, the prices of oil went up. And then also, during that time, the US dollar depreciated. And that means, with a depreciation, the value of our loans also went up. So you see our debt stock going up. So we started getting then loans in the 1980s. You see the spikes going up. We got what they call the structural adjustment loans. The IMF, World Bank, to help us adjust our economies. But the structure adjustment loans came with a structure adjustment conditionalities. And those are the years, the 1980s, when we went into the structure adjustment programs. because they were related to the loans. Again, you remember that 2008, the financial crisis, again, the economy went into recession. Anytime there is a recession, it affects our commodity prices. From 2019 up to today, the spike is going up. It's going up, Why is it going up? New lenders, we went into new lenders. Chinese have been there, but we got more money. We went into the Euro bond market. We went into private instruments like the PPPs, where government is guaranteeing. You know that whole issue. Governments went into those publicly guaranteeing private borrowings. There is the issue of protectionism in the world market, especially for agricultural products, which we also need to look at. A lot of protectionism. You see, European Union can tell you here, bring everything but arms. Everything. EBA. In fact, even the president in his speech was talking about it in his national address. He talked about it, that it's okay. We have all these markets. We have the EU market, EBA, everything but arms. We have AGOA, but you get your bananas here. Even if a banana is very good and take it there, they will start saying the shape is not very, it has to be a certain shape. Add value to your coffee. It won't go to Europe. What they want are the beans, And yet the beans, the prices you have seen, there is a shock, the commodity prices go down, You add value to any product, say, There is what they call tariff escalation in those countries. The more you add value, the more the tariff goes up. Then you wonder, why should I add value? Then we are stuck with exporting the coffee beans. So these are things which we need to debate, to negotiate with those people where we export our products. So, like I said, we need durable solutions. But in order to have durable solutions, it's very, very important we understand all the facets of the debt crisis. So I think I will stop there. Thank you very much.
Paddle of debt distress. Austerity complements prosperity. That's what they say, but our social and economic structures have been disrupted. We are constrained, indirectly strained, servicing an onerous public debt we weren't consulted on, set up on a blind date, we didn't sign up for, budget, and accounted for. Empty hospital beds bereft of life, helpless in strife, with no oxygen ventilators and space to care for the sick. Government spends more on debt repayment and less is allocated to health and education. There are more children out of school because they cannot afford school fees, and more people die from the pandemic. Another statistic for the Ministry of Health. Maternal mortality rates are high. Pregnant women die every day from neglect and shortages in the blood bank. Solutions are complex. Answers are evasive. Our health systems are under-resourced. Funds are less. The COVID-19 vaccine is barely enough. Scarcity screams through hospital corridors. Many have been left hanging with worry wrinkling their brow. How are we supposed to survive in this public trilemma when every point of progression is blocked and economy resuscitation is uncertain? Struggle is romanticized. COVID-19 is a public squatter who refuses to leave, a haunting in every home. Some with barely enough to survive. The task force planned for only a month. roomy eyes, and a hollow belly. These blank faces paint the busy streets of Kampala. They roam through busy traffic in between matatus and borders, knock on car windows for a little change, while others sit out in corners in despair, each drowning in a lake of uncertainty, walking on a tight financial rope, systematically deprived of services. Tomorrow isn't promised. The future is a scam for the young. We are winds, whistling in open fields, spilling sweat and blood for an economy with an appetite for loans whose intention barely touches our feet. An economy that jumps through hoops for loans that they can't afford at our expense. Another inheritance for our unborn children.
Is debt bad? Because we are here, we have already been speaking like angrily. I haven't heard anybody say it is okay. And yet we know very well that there is no way you can, as a country, survive without incurring a debt. So is debt bad? And we are looking at the global picture. This global picture, it has maps of all countries in the world. That's around 152. 151 or something. So the biggest country you see means that it has the biggest share of the debt. The Japan is in the center. It has a debt of around 238. Japan somewhere in the middle. Much as a country, it may be small, but it has like a big debt. And the ratio of Japan, the ratio of Japan's debt to its GDP is 238%. Let's look at Uganda. Uganda as a country is somewhere here. And as at the time of the development of this pictorial, which was around 2018, it was at 40% of GDP. We have a challenge with supply-driven loans, and some of them are high value and less productive. We have a concern with that. So I would like you, media, to pick that issue and say, to what extent are the loans we are getting as a result of our need rather than the external generation? Then we have the failure to adjust the budgets in times of shock and the need to live within our means. We are not living within our means. Then we do not prioritize. Prioritization is lacking. If we continue exceeding like the way we are having a faster movement towards defaulting, we are likely to have the high cost of borrowing, and then when we have a high cost of borrowing, we may have like low credit rating, which will make us non-credit worthy, and then we also have the high cost of domestic debt, which has increased. That our key concerns, one of the concerns we have is that when we have been incurring debt and failing to, looking at the possibility of failing to pay, we are looking at, sometimes government talks of, somebody was quoting the issue of saying that the minister was saying, we might not be able to pay all that money. So we have unrestrained appetite for raising debt. The trends are like, previously we were in 30s, every other year we are accumulating, meaning that we might reach unsustainability levels. Then we also have the issue of skewed prioritization. To what extent are the debts we are incurring the priority of the citizens of the country, because the citizens are the ones who are responsible for paying back. Then the other issue is, do we need all the mega projects? The majority of the projects we are incurring, we are facilitating like with this borrowed money. It is like in transport, in energy, in roads, which necessary as they are, it seems some of them they are not as proportional. For example, recently we were talking about the energy we have. I will not go into the KVAs and what, but you'll find that the percentage of the energy we have produced when we talk of Mujagali, whatever, we are not able to consume all that we need. So why don't we borrow only money for constructing the energy projects that we need, that we can consume? So we have like less than even 30% consumption of what we produce. So wouldn't we rather invest the money also in social services and reduce on those mega projects? Because in economics, we used to have the issue of resource misallocation. And economists like you who are business reporters, you heard of balanced growth strategy. Are we balancing, or we are leaving some areas and putting up others? Like I mentioned, the other word, skewed. Should we balance, or should we let the situation remain skewed? And they are using what you call, is it commanding heights, like some of the things that are very major, they say they are going to raise others. But we have waited for roads, for energy, for these others to raise the rest of the citizens' welfare in vain. So we are sacrificing social services at the hands of infrastructure that we could have postponed. Then we also have the issue of the processes of debt contraction being flouted. We have, for example, the Public Finance Management Act. We sometimes do not follow it. You remember, like the case of Lubowa, you borrow the money without going through the whole procedure. So it becomes suspect. So instead of using the legislative process, go to the next, the legislative processes that are supposed to be followed in order for us to do due diligence, we disregard that and we go ahead and contract loans.
Let's start with the issue of the role of the journalist, which we've been talking about a lot and which is really the heart of our work. I know you will have many roles, but pick one that you think is at the forefront of your mind, the most important to you, or the most prominent in your work, the one you serve the most.
My role as a journalist, I think, is to make office bearers account for their actions. It can be spending, yes, spending majorly because an ordinary citizen is taxed. So that person would want to know where the money goes. So the major role is to ask the questions and explain to the ordinary person what their money is doing.
Sometimes you are passionate about something, but the environment you work in does not allow you to fully exhaust it the way you want to or the way you would like to. And that in a way bogs you down.
I perceive myself as a mirror. And that is, yes, both to the people and to the powers that be, for either to look through and reflect. Shedding a light on some of these issues that are of national importance, and this, in one way or another, continues to give people the power to make an informed decision.
So, like Ali said, part of my role, yes, is to also ensure that these guys clearly explain to the people where their money goes and, you know, stuff like that. All this I do for the benefits of all citizens at the end of the day.
Whenever people, they listen to the radio, they tell to other people, you see, the government has said that, where did you get the information? Radio, you get there. So people, for them, they say, radio, you get there. So my role is to tell the people what is happening.
I see myself as an advocate for policy change or policy improvement. And under that, calling for accountability for use of public resources. That's my major role. That's what I see as my major role.
Set the agenda. Show the public the important issues it needs to focus on. That's also part of my role.
I see the basic roles of journalism have not been handled well here in Uganda. Even just as we are here, our basic role in the description basically is to gather information, report in a balanced and fair manner. But you don't see, even where we are here, you don't see people talking about how much has government paid, for instance.
Generally, my opinion on this whole thing is we are falling short on attaching a whole element on the human face. Let's improve from Uganda's debt hits 67 trillion story, and we take a step a little further to try to analyze the figures.
We analyze them and see whether really this is good for our citizens or not.
For us as journalists, we get chance to interact with very many experts from various fields of life, like health, education, law, and the rest. So, when we get information from those sources, it's our role to break it down into a form which can be easily understood by everybody.
I also wanted to tap in on educating the public. I believe that any story that has to do with finance, it's a sensitive matter and needs in-depth analysis. So it can be a wake-up call to the public, educate them. Some people might be supporting the government on the issues of debt, but they don't know how it's going to affect them. So I believe it's my role to educate them, and maybe that message can be a wake-up call to the public.
Thank you. This was a good beginning for our discussion today regarding what role we have played and continue to play regarding this issue of national debt. This issue of national debt is one of the more frequently covered stories of the media, especially over the last few years as the public debt has been consistently monitored to grow. This story has been a consistent, a story of prominence, sometimes on the cover stories, on the cover pages of papers, headline news on TV and radio. It has gained prominence, and one would think that because it's so frequently covered, we know more about the national debt to see actually what news is going out there to the public regarding the national debt. And I found some things. And the first was, who are the sources of stories about the national debt? Number one is the Ministry of Finance, which is actually the government department that is responsible for managing the national debt and other issues of public resources, making sure that the money borrowed is well used and is accounted for, making sure that the debt incurred can actually be paid, determining when it's appropriate to borrow on behalf of Ugandans, and they are the main people we talk to when it comes to issues of national debt, which makes sense, I guess. They are the ones with the information. A section of the population that's missing in the stories is the ordinary person. Because the ordinary person, when you look at most of the stories about debt, there will be the statement or the quotations from the ministry or official, or from the report of the ministries, or a report of the UN, or a report of Uganda Debt Network, or a report of an NGO like Uganda Debt Network, or SEATINI, or the Tax Justice Alliance. And then others may be in that same line of work. Others like them, but we don't go further down to talk to ordinary people. So they actually suffer the brunt of the debt and all the problems we talked about earlier that come with the debt. When the debt affects the national economy, when the debt needs to be paid back, when, as we saw the whole of yesterday, money that should be going for education, health services is now being spent to pay back a debt, they suffer the consequences. And then the elite sources whom we are communicating with, whom we are talking to, whom we are putting in the news, the things they are talking about remain abstract for ordinary people. What if the debt is unsustainable or sustainable? What does that mean for me as an ordinary Ugandan or a farmer or a market vendor? Does it mean anything for me? Does it mean anything for my life? How does it connect? Let's start with the use of numbers in our stories. Because, as you know, of course, the debt story is a numbers story. You cannot talk about debt without talking about the numbers. The figures come with the territory. If you just say, oh, Uganda's debt is so high, the next question would be, how high? You mean? So numbers come with the territory. And we need to understand the numbers because before we are able to explain how important the debt is, how problematic it is, and maybe what options are available for our country, for the people in authority to be able to address the problems that come with debt. But unfortunately, the majority of us actually are averse to the numbers. We don't like the numbers. I have to confess I'm one of those people. The numbers are, well, and unfortunately these debt stories, financial stories, budget stories come with so many lines of numbers. Sometimes you sit back and say, okay, now which is the important number? And sometimes it's quite difficult to make out. So it's important for us, one, to understand the numbers, to be able to tell which is the critical part of the story that we need to interrogate and analyze and take to the public for an open and meaningful discussion to take place. Now, one of the key ways that numbers are presented and ways that actually work and make them meaningful is the use of percentages. For example, the average amount of debt owed by each Ugandan is 1.5 million shillings. How has this been arrived at? Yes, debt, the total debt versus the total population of Uganda. So each one then gets a share. So how can this be problematic? Yes. There are some people, yes. There are some people who also have to pay the debt, who have been included in this calculation in the total population, who... Yes, some are dying, yes. But some are not getting any share. Well, maybe not getting any share, but not getting a disproportionate share of the resource for which the borrowing is made. For example, when you borrow, the money is going to build a road. If I'm not going to use that road, why should I pay? But I obtain a share of that debt. If the money is borrowed to build a school, but I'm not a school-going person, and also I don't have any person or relative or child in school, but still I'll be able to pay. So here these are the questions. Are the numbers in the story well explained? Now, these are not complete stories. They are maybe the first 2 or 3 paragraphs of a story. So are the numbers used in there well explained? Are they too many or too few? And number 3, take the main number and link it to an ordinary, to ordinary people.
And question 2 was whether what was the main number in the story. The main number in the story is the 97% of domestic revenue. That's the number, I think. And this, however, should have been explained in the first paragraph of the story.
One of the things we highlighted as a group is that in the first paragraph, the figures look to be so many. The 45 trillion, the 25 trillion, the writer would have tried to provide another paragraph for these other figures.
There was a clear comparison, so you could really understand the story. And of course, the writer connected the main figure in this, which is 65.82 trillion shillings, to the ordinary person. And it came, he used the average, relied his story on the average, which came down to 1.5 million for each Ugandan. That's what they owed. So it's really, for the 2 paragraphs, I think they checked all the boxes for the questions that you've given us. Yeah.
There was a comparison of the figures, 2021, rather 2020 and 2019. However, the comparison comes in a bit later. That's in the 3rd paragraph. So we thought it could have been in the first paragraph.
Yeah, there were just 2 paragraphs, but some of the figures were many, yes. But now when you come to say the biggest percentage, the biggest portion, 15.4 trillion of the 41.3 trillion national budget for the next fiscal year has been earmarked for debt repayment. These are big figures, but they could come in the middle. Now, if let me say, for me, as a group, we thought if you could break down this 15.4 and 45, you could say if the URA maybe collects 10 shillings in a financial year, and maybe 7 or 6 of those collected goes into paying debt, someone will quickly understand the effect than throwing a very big figure at them, you know? So those simple explanations, I think, make a story more appealing to people.
I wanted us to look briefly at another factor that makes stories compelling, and that is context. I'll make use of a triangle and look at, divide it in 3, because then it provides the 3 key parts that should be in your story. The 3 key parts of information that should be in your story. They do not necessarily have to be organized in that manner. You could find that the one down has come on top for various reasons, but at least it helps you to ensure that you've addressed the key questions of the context of your story. So the first part is an event. This we're familiar with. And a lot of our stories actually address this part really well. We cover the event, we receive a report, and we report it well. We talk to the minister and report well what he has said. The second part is, they usually call it a discourse, but it's the industry or sector environment in which our event is taking place, right? So let's go back to, and the third is, of course, what we talked about before, the political, economic, and social context. And where also we've taken account of the people who are involved or who are going to be impacted by the story.
There are a few things I tried to pick from yesterday's discussion was mostly our roles as journalists when it comes to debt reporting.
Linking debt to individual me, individual self, rather than thinking you're writing about others. But what does this mean to the individual you?
The other key issue for me is looking more on the impact of the debt. We should focus more on the impact. What does it mean for anyone who reads? And that you also mentioned should come out clearly in the first paragraph or the second one of any story. It should be summarized there.
Another one is humanizing the debt story to reflect what the community feels.
So now I will hand over to Ausi to take us through a discussion of humanizing the debt.
I want us to have a very interesting discussion. It is going to be a story about debt with only images, with the end goal of us appreciating the debt issue. The World Bank has estimated that more people are actually going to be pushed into poverty. 3.1 million Ugandans will actually be pushed into extreme poverty. Why? Because one of the reasons is because their government is failing to support them. Yes? And the government doesn't have the money. The government is giving the money to the lenders. Yes? So 3.1 million people will be pushed into poverty. How is poverty measured? Poverty, according to the World Bank, is measured by every person who lives on less than $1.9 a day is considered a poor person. $1.9 is about, that is about 7,000, right? Yeah. So 3 million more people will be living on that amount per day. With the rising cost of food, the rising cost of medical care, the rising cost of education, the hiking transport costs right now, do you think those people are going to be able to afford a living, and yet they only have 7,000 in their pocket per day? The amount that was paid in interest to lenders was almost double what was spent on health care. You can see that old man. He's on a ventilator. Is that a ventilator? Yes. He's on a ventilator. He's on a deathbed. But even amid this moment right now, where a lot more needs to be allocated to health, to help vaccinate our own people, we are spending still much more on repaying our lenders than we are spending on health care. So that is a photo taken in Mulago Hospital of a gentleman passing on his deathbed. This is in Mulago Hospital. It is not taken from anywhere else. Suddenly, I don't have a photo of the facilities that are actually offered in the UK, but I know you've all watched the news. So when you compare this to the support that is actually provided to one who is in the UK, everything is there. You see all the equipment necessary to support their life is there. But this person only has to depend on an oxygen mask. This could even actually be a private hospital. I don't think this can be in Mulago, unless you're going to pay a hefty sum. So that is the impact of debt, and would love to see all that come out in our stories, rather than quote these so many figures of those economist figures of debt to GDP ratio, debt service to revenue ratio, and all that. We want maybe half of your story to be talking about these issues, and that is when the people are actually going to get concerned about debt. First of all, debt is measured in how much a country has borrowed over time. Yeah. So Uganda's debt is now 6.5 trillion, 65 trillion. We so far borrowed 65 trillion. And another way to look at that is by measuring the debt to GDP ratio. By the end of this year, our debt will be 49% of GDP. But I'll tell you one thing. The debt to GDP ratio, the figure that we love so much, does not shed the entire picture of a country's debt burden, as is normally referred by economists. It is appropriate for showing the evolution of a country's debt. And it is also used for comparing with other countries. Like you might say, Uganda's debt to GDP ratio is 49%, whereas the one for Japan is 230. It is just for comparing countries. The debt to GDP ratio. It is where you get a country's debt, all the money that it has borrowed over time, and you divide that by its GDP. What is GDP? GDP is the income earned in a given year, right? From producing goods and also providing services. The key considerations beyond the debt to GDP ratio, you need to look at things like how long are we going to have to pay back that loan, i.e. the actual costs of that debt, the interest that is going to be paid on that loan, and also the repayment period. Some debts have longer repayment periods. So there is need to look at the entire picture. A debt becomes a burden when a country sacrifices or foregoes the provision of services to her citizens, essential services to her citizens, just to repay her debt. The country foregoes the provision of essential services to her citizens just to pay back the lenders. Now, when we look at interest rates, there are two types of interest rates. There is a fixed one. Yeah, that means the rate doesn't change. Once you go and agree with a lender that I'll be paying you 10% every year for the next 10 years, you keep paying 10%. And then there is the variable one. It keeps switching. Yeah, that means you haven't fixed it with the lender. Anytime today it is 10%, tomorrow it is 15%. The other day it is 8%, 5%, and then it goes to 20%. Which one is much safer of the two? the fixed rate, right? So that is also a key consideration when you're looking at the interest that we're going to be paying on our debt. Is it fixed or it is variable? Does it keep changing? And then there is this word that we normally throw around that is called the concessional debt. You have a question?
You have highlighted on the issue of the fixed and then the variable rate. What conditionalities determine that? If you don't mind throwing a light on that.
Now, the fixed is normally agreed with the lender. A variable one, it is normally these financial markets that like to give us loans that are actually at variable rates. Yeah? So our government hasn't borrowed yet from those Eurobond markets, from the big banks, the large investment banks. But when it goes to take a loan from there, that rate will be variable. I'm yet to find out, but we have some proportion of our debt that is actually under a variable rate. I don't know which one is, which exact debt, kind of debt is actually variable. But it's normally those market lenders who like variable rates, because that means they get to benefit when the rates go high, because they are now getting more money, more interests. Yeah? Our government is borrowing very expensively domestically by issuing bonds and treasury bills. It borrows at rates of 15%. Now, let us contrast that with countries like Japan. Why did I say that Japan has a debt to GDP ratio of 236%, but its debt is not a worry? Because Japan is borrowing at rates of 0%. In real terms, they are actually negative when you adjust for inflation and all that. So Japan is borrowing at 0 and negative rates. No interest on those loans. Yeah? That is why, however much it has the largest debt to GDP ratio, its debt is not worrying. Because its debt is zero interest. Zero interest. Now, that is the same case with the US. Last year, Trump signed a stimulus package of $2 trillion. That was money that was to be borrowed, $2 trillion US dollars, by issuing bonds. That money also came at 0 interest. In real terms, it is actually negative. Yeah? So, that is why they keep saying that Japan and the US's debt is not as worrying as our debt, because for us we are borrowing very, very expensively. And most especially, each time that our government borrows domestically, we borrow at very high rates. Now, whenever our government borrows money, yeah, there is a maturity date when it has to pay back that loan. That is the deadline. Now, what happens when it hasn't gotten the money yet to pay back that loan? Is it going to tell the lenders, no, we are sorry, we don't have enough money? It borrows by doing what they call a debt rollover or refinancing. Now, the way I'm going to describe it here is not the same way Dr. Adam Mugume will describe it. But in simple layman's terms, it is borrowing to pay off an old loan. I gave you an example yesterday. You go and borrow a loan of 20 million. You promise you're going to pay back in 2 weeks. Yeah? 2 weeks come, you don't have the money. You go to another friend to borrow this 20 million to pay back this one. Yeah? And that comes at more interest. And then again you come to borrow from this person to pay back this person. That is what our government is doing by rolling over. And each time this debt is rolled over, it comes at a high rate. It becomes more expensive. Yeah? And that is the reason why we spent 4.1 trillion on interest payments. There are 3 ways a country can default on its loan. One is it fails to pay the interests, because suppose you have to pay interest every year or every month. It skips maybe a year or a month. What happens when a country defaults on its loan? A lawsuit is one of the things that could likely happen. A country could get sued by the lender in international courts. Another thing that could happen if a country defaulted on its loan is that we could lose our resources to the creditors, to the lenders. They could get seized. Thank you very much, and I will stop there.
Now, I'll also take 1 or 2 questions, so that then we can invite our next speaker, who is a member of parliament, to speak to us.
I'm just learning today that Japan and the US are borrowing almost on zero profit. Could you be in position to tell us what makes these nationals able to lend their governments, not expecting anything like profit from it? And what would our own, because this is by domestic borrowing, what makes these people lend their governments at no profit that we are not doing?
Why their governments are actually able to borrow at 0%, while our government borrows very expensively? It is an issue to do with the markets and all that. What is happening is that our commercial banks do not have much savings within them, yeah, from which they can lend to any borrower, be it the government or us, the ordinary people. Whereas the banks in developed countries like the US or Japan have accumulated so many savings.
Professor Ruanga is a presidential advisor on matters like this. So possibly we can put to him that question of why he's not advising the president to stop the Minister of Finance from this scary borrowing.
Aid and borrowing have become a culture in many of African countries. We think we have to get aid. In fact, we sometimes feel we're entitled to this aid. We have to get the loans. And we are cheating in this process. We are cheating our children and grandchildren out of their future, because they have to pay these loans. And how do they pay them? Now, how much, and you have to find out, have our leaders mortgaged our country? Because you hear that we constructed Dam A, we constructed Road B, from the money we expect from oil. And as far as I can see, Oil is a very fickle business. 1 year it is down, 2 years it is up, and so on and so on. There are so many fluctuations. And maybe by the time our oil comes out of the ground, the world will be using less oil because they are moving to other sources of energy to power all sorts of gadgets. So you have to follow all this. Find out this money we are borrowing, and especially in Africa, not only Uganda, but in Africa in general, there are so many leakages. How do we plug these leakages? The statistic I got recently was that Africans, those who have the money, hide 40% of their money outside of our continent in safe havens around the world. The Asians only hide 6%. So you can see, if our rich people were not hiding this money, maybe we wouldn't borrow so much because they'll be financing projects here. But why? And some of these call themselves patriots. This is a cliche, patriotism. But when you're hiding your money, keeping it away from us, are you helping? Are you helping our countries? Now, one thing which I want you to consider very seriously is whether we have an alternative to all this. Whether from a culture of loans and aid, we can get on to something different. You have to find your purpose, you have to define your roles, and you have to stand your ground because the resources that we are mortgaging are your resources and your children's resources and your grandchildren's resources. And you cannot sit idle when the people who have lent us money come one day when we can't pay and say, oh, okay, this lake is ours, this river is ours, this gold is ours, this marble is ours. We have no end of resources in Uganda, but we're just giving them away. Huh? If I want to be obscene, I would say that this is the whole economy. Lastly, since you are the media, you should inform the ordinary people by whatever means possible what loans they have, how they are contracted, how they are paid for, and as far as I'm concerned, what the leakages are.
At the Nation Media Group, particularly the Daily Monitor, my employers, we've done a series of debt stories. Normally, towards around this time when it's about budget, we are coming at the tail end of the budget, the budget period, we tend to do a lot of debt stories, and not only the Nation Media Group, but all other medias do that. I've read a lot of stories from most of you here, most of my colleagues right here. And I still ask, why do we have to wait until about that time for us to be churning out, these stories? Can't we make it a matter that it's, run throughout the year? Because what happens, there's an overload, there's an overdose of information, and maybe, just maybe, we may not be, the kind of impact that we are looking at may not be what we anticipate because, of that kind of overload of information. That's my view. So I'll encourage you and myself to see how we can make it a topic throughout. It becomes part of the daily docket, part of the daily menu. We don't have to wait until the last few weeks or the last few months before the budget is presented for us to go very, very hard on it. Now, what are some of the things that I do normally when trying to do a lot of the debt story? I understand one of it was you looked at yesterday. There was a lot of good and a lot of bad and somewhat not so good, not so bad things, very good critique. Now, we need, of course, to do that all the time. We need to find a way of critiquing our own stories and giving feedback. But while going around these stories, what do we need to do? This is my experience. This is what I do, is let's try to understand the subject, okay? Let's try to understand the subject. First of all, is it true that debt as a subject is a complex one? Do you guys agree? Is it complex? It is complex. Isaac, you think so? Huh? Is it complex because we don't understand it, we don't want to read? I mean, what makes it hard? These are some, and now I'm speaking to you directly as journalists, as colleagues. What makes it hard? Absolutely, I agree with you. Now, and so the follow-up question is, whose responsibility is it to? Absolutely. So that's the question. So as journalists, we have a responsibility to understand these issues if we want to break them down, if we want to communicate them. So let's begin with ourselves first. And the reason why I'm coming so hard on this issue is because as a journalist, I am trying to, I don't want to sugarcoat this business that, I don't understand it and you expect somebody to make you understand. I don't think that's the best way to, to go about this issue. So if we want to be reporting about debt and all these things, we must first, the initiative must begin with us, and we must try to see that we learn as much as possible.
Blessed are the young, for they shall inherit the national debt. Herbert Hoover. Debt cripples the future. Transparency augments credibility, abates corruption, and allows us to shed light on debt with intention not limited to holding the government accountable for the risk accrued from non-performing loans. We are enslaved to creditors, trying to win ourselves of debt, struggling to stay ahead of interest payments, a disintegrating economy, unsustainable, where public offices look at their offices as an opportunity to accumulate wealth and lobby for unnecessary expenses, like creation of new districts or purchasing expensive cars for the members of parliament. Then send out surprise packages of a shared debt stressed. I am stressed, but what happens to the average Ugandan when taxes on fuel and housing rise like bread dough and simple profundities are ignored? When food becomes more expensive and poverty starts changing faces and taking places in our homes, when housing is barely affordable and the streets make destitutes of us. COVID-19 came with the blues and reset our economy. Some businesses had to close and others are still strapped on struggle, most barely surviving. But what happens then? Do we become spectators of debt distress and praise a system that refuses to take a loan diet? This harsh reality affects us all, our jobs, our homes, our businesses, and the future of our children. We need to take action.
Very serious. Start to TikTok. Background omulabi. Oli kuchiwa watu oli ku TikTok. Kachale jo kalabye. naawe obeera serious. Ngenda kukakola lwakuba nkyali mu ddwaliro naye ngenda kukakola, nina okukakola ssaawa zino, sigenda nakulinda kuva mu ddwaliro. You just watch, just check. Go on TikTok now. Be serious. Who isn't on TikTok? Ah, fake chick. These potholes of Kampala. One pothole in someone's relationship. Do you know how many potholes are bound to come here? You're not the first woman to get pregnant in Uganda, by the way. Talk slowly, the contractions. Where are they? Where are they? I don't know, the potholes. I came when they were here. Now the whole body has contractions. And you think you're going to produce right now? Where is my room? I pay for private. Where is it? In which hospital? This one? Isn't this a new hospital? It is. Yes, I paid 300,000 for private. Just show me to my room. In Uganda, private, in a government hospital. How much do you pay? 300 shillings, Uganda shillings, 1,000. First calm down, first calm down. Madam, how is the baby? You know labor. Can you get somebody? You don't have my room. Okay, calm down. Pass here. Where? Here, just pass here. Go behind. Don't ask for private. Just feel private. Hey, Ugandan women. Hey, Musau. You look familiar. Have we been treating you?
Yes.
We've been treating you for what? Auntie, Uganda, in the hospital. I can't remember her name.
The other people told me that I was mad.
They told you that you were mad?
Then now they told me I'm okay. And they said I come to you and then you let me go home.
For you, how do you feel? Is your memory back? Because I know you finished the medicine. How do you feel? What do you remember? What do you remember from the last time before we admitted you?
I was brought here when, the only thing I remember is I was brought here when Secondly was still the vice president.
For sure you deserve to be discharged. You are here on what?
Secondly was still the vice president.
Anyway, let me check your records. Do you at least remember your name?
They told me that I'm called Otim.
They just told you, you also accept. Otim. Let me see. Otim. Otim, you're okay. You're okay, actually. You finished everything. I can see Piriton, tick. You have taken all the Canada in this hospital. You are almost finishing it. You need to leave. Otim. Actually, by the way, there is an NGO which paid for your treatment. So you're okay. You're very okay, apart from just 1.5 million. 1.5 million. That one, we demand you from it, courtesy of the Chinese.
But you said they paid everything.
Everything. Only 1.5 million left. You have to pay that one. China Zagala. China Zetaga.
Let me first stay mad for 1 more year.
Okay. Let me tell you. Okara or team, which one is it?
Team, they told me Otim.
Otim. Even if you go back and you become mad for 1 more year, this one won't leave. Zinozo, Ovoli Muraru, Ovoli Mutamivu, Ova Kakuzara, Omuchina Zagara. So, you decide what concerns you now.
Let me first stay mad.
And now see here. These people here, they think you just leave the hospital Hello? You induce the patient, I am coming. I am coming. Isn't that my clinic? Haven't I promised to be there? So you induce the patient, I am coming. This one hasn't even yet started. After all, she only paid 300. Musa, the baby is coming. Drink water. Hello? Hello? I said I am coming. Now you hear that one. She thinks she's going to deliver immediately. We have had here patients who have taken 2 months when they're in labor. You come down. Musao! 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 Who is the Musao?
What is the problem?
Can't you see that I am in labor?
No, when Musao is not there, I am the substitute.
So what is your role here?
What is the problem? What are you feeling?
I am feeling pain everywhere. Where is the Musao? The baby is coming.
Okay, you sit down. Sit down.
But you don't.
I know what I'm doing. You sit down.
This hospital. And I thought it was a good hospital.
You sit down.
See the person who was discharged, you are putting one sock has one leg, has a sock, one. We are discharged, you are busy disturbing our patient. Madam! Yes. Now you have become quiet. What is happening? Musa, you have refused to help me. You call when you are ready. The money they pay us here is not for working all the time. When the baby has started peeping, you tell me. Musa, the head is here. Me, I'm coming to catch the legs. You push. Just continue. Be very busy. That is why you came to this hospital. Your money has brought you here. Madam? Yes. That one? If the baby is to be born in Gulu, you are still at Kona Kambini like 45 more minutes. Just keep pushing. Push, 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 kanda. 500 followers. I like it. I like it, I like it. This one is a good one. Pozi kayimba chakalala kakajja wano. Yes, please. Come. I'm doing. The body is out. If your husband could not escort you to the hospital, why should I be the one suffering with this Ugandan salary? No, no, no. Madam, when the baby is coming, you let me know. Are you serious or you are just trying to make me come there? What is? She has produced. Now, all citizens were like this one. I paid my money. Wait for it. Third delivery of the day. Hashtag China Uganda Friendship Hospital. What friendship is this? You are not friendly at all. Hey, calm down. The friendship is between the government and China, not me and you. I don't know. You people. I paid my money. You did not touch me. I suffered alone. You think you have suffered? I am going. Have discharged myself. No, madam. Calm down. You need to receive, because that baby doesn't even have a birth certificate. We shall give him a name from the village there. Calm down. Let me at least clear you. You are deal, okay.
Madam.
You are deal.
You gave birth alone?
Oti.
Is this one normal or not normal? Because
Apparently,
I don't understand you.
Apparently,
no,
please, our beds are all occupied. Don't tell him which condition he's in. We need him to be discharged. Madam, here it is 1.8 million.
1.8?
Yes, please.
From where, madam?
Isn't your pay the 300? Didn't I pay? Yes. 300,000 for your normal delivery. Yes. 1.5 for the Muchina. Who told you I'm married to a Muchina? I don't know which Muchina you're talking to. No, this hospital was given, we got a loan from the Chinese, and you can see the name. So, everyone, whether you are, nowadays we don't even have to wait for you to reach the stage where you borrow from your friends, you don't pay. How can we, the government, trust you to pay? So for you, actually for you, okay. Because the child is going to be enjoying free things. So, that one should start giving us the 1.5 immediately. For you, we shall collect later. So 1.5 million for the child. For you, I free him. Okay, if I am free, you keep the baby. No, take the baby. That's what 1.5 from the baby. Madam, take your baby. Give me a baby.
Mama, you give me.
You give me what to do with the baby. Yes, you didn't move away.
You gave birth alone.
Friendship hospital. Not friendly at all. I will never come back to you.
Better to be mad than to give birth.
Communicators are storytellers. As Africans, storytelling is in our DNA, you know. We are storytellers, you know, and you are the modern storytellers, you know. So continue doing that work, and we need the voices of the people, you know, their experiences to be told, their stories to be heard, and you are the people who are going to do that. You need to talk about the stories of greed. You know, when you look at the debt story, it's so interesting and so heartbreaking, you know. It's about greed, big business. Maybe that's, we didn't talk about that, the issue of big business, you know. Behind there, the people who are lending us, who are doing the voucher funds, that's big money, big businesses. But at the end of the end of the rainbow, they are the poor people, the poor women, like we have seen in the skit, you know, women who can't even afford, you know, to have health services. So all those stories need to come out. And as we are saying, our stories, some of them have been so much around GDP, percentages, statistics, numbers, which is good because we need to understand the extent of the problem, but sometimes those figures crowd out the actual experiences the human face, and this is what we need to bring out. Another issue which I want to talk about, which also Ladu brought out, is the issue of linking. The debt issue has to be looked at very broadly. When you remember what Professor Rwanga Runyigo, his presentation about the economy, the people's economy, whose economy is it? You know, so we need to look at all those issues. And the whole issue is, how do we get out of the debt trap? You know, we have stories, that's where we are, that's what's happening. People have no access to health services, which is okay. We need to talk about that. We need to bring out those experiences. But at the end of the day, how do we get out of the debt trap? And that's where we have to link up, look at broadly the economy. We need to rethink the economy, you know. The cooperative, as Professor Runyigo was talking about, how do you mobilize domestic resources? How do you stem the outflow of resources? The lenders, you know, talking to the lenders. How do we talk to the lenders? We need to tell them they have to be responsible lenders. I remember when we had the UDN, the debt campaign, the Jubilee campaign, and we are saying no, the lenders, you haven't been responsible. Those are odious, illegitimate debts. We are not part of them, we are not paying. So maybe we can be able to see how we talk to the lenders. We should look at alternatives. You know, if the policies which we have been following have put us where we are, and we are continuing in the same policies, does it make sense? Like the saying goes, if you do the same thing, expect a different outcome, you are like, was your team here? Okay, so we need to rethink, what can we do differently? The professor also raised the issue of what we need and what we want. You know, we have so many wants. We want a big cabinet, we want a big ministers, so many. From each village, you want a minister, we want it. We want big cars for our ministers, we get it, you know. But what do we need, you know? So we need to do that so that we can be able to get out of this debt trap. And you, the fourth estate, have to play a key role. Somebody was asking, why isn't it working? It isn't that the media haven't been talking about it, questioning where we are going, but maybe it's the spirit which is, the flesh which is weak and the spirit is willing, or maybe both the spirit and the flesh are weak. But we need to continue that. My sister was asking the choice of the Member of Parliament. That Member of Parliament, because the committees haven't yet been picked anyway, but we need as many members of Parliament as possible who understand and appreciate this issue. You don't need to be on the Committee on Finance, Committee on National Economy, but we need as many members of Parliament as possible to articulate these issues and to be able to link them to their constituency. Because every time a member of Parliament gets a phone call from their voters asking for money, for school fees, for somebody who is dead, for health, she will be able to go back to Parliament and say, you know what, we need to address this debt issue. So let us talk to as many members of Parliament as possible. Another issue is the issue of mindset change. We need to, as Ugandans, as Africans, we need to change our mindset. I don't know how you are going to work on that as the media, but we need to. As Africans, we have this entitlement of aid. Aid. And we go with a begging bow, you know, looking for aid, you know. We don't even consider, you know, the very rich things we have. This continent is so rich. From the minerals in the soil, the trees on the ground, the environment, the people, you know. But we go with a begging bow. We get some little dollars, we give we give our minerals, our trees, our lakes, our swamps, and even our children, because we are now exporting our children. So what more can we export? I don't know. So that mindset change, and also telling our people or telling ourselves that we can be able to take charge of our economy. You know, why should people tell us? You know, they tell us we can't even determine our level of poverty. We are calculating with professor there. You know, also you said the US dollar 1.9 a day, that's below the poverty level. And we are saying that isn't right. You know, 1.9 per day. If you have a family of 7 people, how much is that a day? How many families can afford that? So that means there are so many people below the poverty line. But we are talking about 3 million people. yet maybe it's 20 million people. So can't we determine our own poverty, you know? Let us take charge of our development. They tell us the policies to follow, isn't it? They tell us. Professor has a book, and I think he wrote that they even tell us the gods to believe in. They have told us that when believe in that God, and we continue to believe in those gods. They tell us our enemies, you know? Those are our enemies, those are our friends. You remember we fought in the Second and First World War. They told us those are our enemies, you go and fight. And our people died there, you know? So for how long are we going to let other people dictate to us, you know, as if we don't have any brains? Somebody will say, your taxes, no, do that taxes. Don't do that. Your budget, don't do that. Your policy, liberalize, privatize. Don't do that, you know? So I think it's very, very high time we take charge of our development, we take charge of our economy, you know? And we regurgitate all this information, you know? World Bank, like it's a heaven sent, you know? World Bank says 1.9, World Bank says, World Bank says, you know? Then why doesn't World Bank come and take over this country? You know? So let us be in charge of our development, our destiny. I have really enjoyed this debate. Let us continue putting these issues out there. Let us tell the story. And I know at one time, people are listening. Maybe they will listen more and do something about it. But let us be hopeful. Let us put on, we talk about putting on lenses. Today, let us also put on debt lenses. The budget, they are going to read the budget. Look at the budget and say, will it help us get out of the debt trap, or are we being trapped more there? So when you are writing your stories, you know, have that broader outlook. You know, those are the way we are going to link up our stories. So thank you so much. Thank you for those comments, the feedback. We look at them. They are very, very good feedback, and we can be able to incorporate them and address them.